Hi everyone, my name is Professor Warren, and today we'll be talking about arguments that are based on logos, or again, arguments that are based on facts and reason. So let's get into this. So, as I said, logos are arguments that are based in reason, logic, and facts. And so these are arguments that are more concerned with either providing statistics, numbers, or general logic to sort of persuade you into believing or buying whatever it is that they're trying to tell you. And most students, when I ask them, oh, are you convinced by facts and reason? They often say, well, of course I am. Everybody is, right? And while good arguments do utilize logos in some way, shape, or form, it's important that you understand that what type of logos maybe that they're using. And this kind of goes into this idea of artistic proofs and inartistic proofs. So if you're utilizing an argument solely or mostly on logos, right? You're either using artistic proofs, which are constructed arguments that appeal to reason or common sense, and inartistic proofs, such as using hard evidence, facts, statistics, testimonies, things like that to sort of prove your points. And a good way to sort of remember these is artistic proofs, right? They're ones that appeal to reason or common sense. So, for instance, if I say, if you go outside, you're going to get wet and it's clearly raining out there, that would be sort of an artistic proof, right? I don't need really any sort of facts or statistics to kind of prove that to you. You can just clearly look outside and go, oh, yes, if I walk outside the way I am, I'm going to get wet, right? In artistic proofs, right, those are the things that have to use hard evidence, facts or statistics to back them up. So that's sort of the difference between those two. And I always remember the difference because inartistic, right, facts and statistics aren't very artistic unless you make a graph, right? So that's how I always remember the difference. I go, oh yes, inartistic proofs, this is the hard stuff, right, not the frilly things. But one other thing that you need to be aware of when you're constructing a argument based on logos is that you always have to have a good logical structure for that. And a good logical structure for a argument based on logos is it has a statement and a proof. So it's got something that it's saying, and then it gives sort of the reason for that. And so when you're reading someone's thesis or their argument, right, they'll usually have some sort of statement about something, and then they provide some sort of proof, right? So a statement might be something along the lines of, our university should move to a 4-day work week, right? That would be the statement. And then after that, you would provide some sort of proof for that. So that's sort of, it's not always a general rule to gauge how well a logos-based argument is, which we'll talk about here in a second. But it is sort of a first step into seeing, okay, well, is this even a logos-based argument? And so if it has a statement and a proof, you can sort of move from there. So before we continue, we should also talk about fake news because I'm going to be referencing this quite a bit because fake news, right, in its name is false or misleading information under the guise of news. So it tries to present itself as news, but it's misleading or there's something false about what they're providing. And the reason that we have to bring this up now is because a lot of examples I'll be showing you it's they're trying to utilize logos. They either do so in a misleading way or they give off the impression that they're giving logos, but it's factually incorrect. And you may be asking, well, why do people do this? Why would people purposefully mislead others? And as we have on screen, right, it's either to damage the reputation of either an individual or an entity, right? So they maybe provide something, but it's inherently misleading, right? They do that to make money, right? It's easy to lie and say, oh, look, this herb that I'm growing will cure your cancer, right? Obviously they want to make money from that. So, they want you to buy that herb. Or to promote a specific ideology. We see this quite a bit with very biased, political leaning news sources. They very much want you to buy into an ideology. And once you buy into that ideology, you're more likely to stay and continue listening, and they make money and so forth, right? So, one other thing that I do want to mention as well is people always think fake news is a modern invention, and while it is something that is a problem in our society, it's important to note that fake news has always existed, right? You can think about how ancient people said that these huge monsters and creatures existed, and that would be misleading news, right? And we specifically see it in the 1800s with what's called yellow journalism, which was, they would send you, and some of you may still have experienced this, or maybe your parents have. You'll get like really weird letters in the mail, and it'll be like, oh, did you know that so and so is the ringleader of some cult? Go to our website and blah blah blah. So definitely things like that have existed for a long time. As long as humans have existed, logos and fallacious logos have always existed. So, one other thing that you have to be aware of, right, is just because you use logos in your argument or your papers does not mean that people always buy it, right? You may be saying, well, I am very smart and I am very persuaded by logos, but you have to realize a lot of people aren't. There probably are instances that you yourself may not always buy a logos based argument. And it's important to note, Elizabeth Colbert, however you say it, my apologies, in her article, Why Facts Don't Change Minds, she says thousands of subsequent experiments have confirmed and elaborated on this finding. As everyone who's followed the research or even occasionally picked up a copy of Psychology Today knows, any graduate student with a clipboard can demonstrate that reasonable seeming people are often totally irrational. Rarely has this insight seemed more relevant than it does now. And in your reading, it sort of goes over how, um, I believe these students, with their clipboard, they went around and they tried to persuade people, and because they had a clipboard, people were more likely to believe them. So it just sort of goes to show that, even though they were, not being 100%, factually based, people, are often persuaded just by, simple things like people who look maybe professional or people who look smart. People will listen to them, even if their logos um, is completely irrational. And even people that are very well informed, people still don't listen to them, right? So just because you are, and just because you add it into your paper, doesn't mean people are going to buy it. You then have to, persuade them to, take whatever logos you're using in your argument or your paper and have them believe it. So here is a very quick example. It mentions this in your reading, but here's sort of a visual representation of what your reading was talking about, which is how people like Jeff Sessions try to utilize logos in a way, but ultimately it is misleading and ill-informed. So let's watch this really quickly and then we'll sort of discuss what's happening here. So very quickly, I just want to go ahead and pause this. Almost half of that what he said was true, right? The DACA program did provide, these benefits to people. However, right? Did you catch some of the things that he said? He would use words like essentially, right? And here, especially when he says 800,000 mostly adult illegal aliens, that is incorrect. You couldn't apply for it as an adult. You had to have been a child. I can't remember the age range, but you have to have been a child and then you could apply for that. And even then, if you were here illegally and then try to apply for it, get, you could not be part of the DACA program. So already, right, Jeff Sessions tries to utilize a little bit of logos, but then he puts in misinformation, or at least if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, very, I would guess, maybe misleading information, right? And that's why people, right, fall for this stuff because when you mix actual like facts with things that are misleading or ill-informed, people will buy it. So you always have to, if somebody's presenting logos to you, you always have to be critical of every single piece of information that they're providing to you because they'll do something sneaky like this. But let's continue just for a little bit longer. Okay, and yes, DACA was controversial. Again, providing some evidence, right? However, the fact that he's saying that DACA led to the surge of illegal immigrants on the border is incorrect. What Jeff Sessions is not telling you is that during this time in which this is happening, fluctuations of immigrants were already occurring. There would be, again, a few years before there was a huge surge, and then it went down. And even then, the surge here wasn't even a surge. So that's just factually incorrect. It wasn't because now these illegal immigrants are trying to use DACA. That's incorrect. The surge here was nothing compared to surges in the past, and it definitely wasn't because of DACA. There were other things happening in the country at the time. But as I've said, this is why you just can't take logos face value, because logos can be misconstrued, can be misled, or just be plain false. So one of the things that you can do in response to Jeff Sessions, right, is I have a link here. If you're interested, you can check it out. But definitely, if you ever find yourself like listening, especially to politicians and things from the media, one of the good places to start is either go to factcheck.org or Snopes. And this applies to if you see like something weird on social media, or if you hear something weird, right, through people like Jeff Sessions. You can always go to factcheck.org and Snopes. These are nonprofit organizations, so they're not, paid by a company or whatever. And they're usually volunteers who will do credible research, and they'll dig into these claims, and they'll either tell the audience, like, hey, it's true, or hey, it's not true, or hey, it's misleading, or here's some things that are true and here's some things that are not true. So definitely, if you see something strange, like maybe a weird hack video online that's telling you, to take a fork and put it in a, outlet, right? Definitely go to fact check and Snopes first. And then if they don't have anything about it, just try to utilize some basic common sense and read into what it is that they're saying. Okay? Awesome. So let's talk about statistics, because again, statistics are really good ways to sort of persuade your audience, right? Especially if you find credible statistics about an issue, an event, things like that. However, it is important to note that statistics also can be misleading. And so, sorry for this low quality image, but it was the only image I could find of this particular ad. And if you look at this ad, it says more than 80% of dentists recommend Colgate. Now, upon hearing that, what are maybe initial thoughts? I know at least my initial thought is if I read that, that signals to me, oh, 80% of dentists, they mean 80% of dentists in the entire United States. And this ad actually got Colgate in trouble. They came under heavy fire from the Advertising Standards Authority, the ASA, and that was because people did believe this. But what happened was Colgate surveyed dentists, and they would put their brand in there, and they would also put other brands. So it wasn't just Colgate that was involved. They put other brands of toothpaste in. However, the dentist could pick however many they liked. So it wasn't just that they were picking Colgate and just Colgate. They might have picked Colgate and different other toothpaste brands, because that's what the survey asked them. Just, hey, which ones do you like? And they would just check which ones they like. So definitely that's why statistics can be misleading. You have to read into, okay, how did they collect these statistics, right? So if the way that they collected, kind of like Colgate did, is misleading, or it's just incorrect, or it's a flawed system to gather statistics from, then maybe you can throw those statistics out. So just because it's a number, it is a nice number, doesn't mean that it's true. You have to look into how somebody got those statistics in the first place. And the reason is because statistics especially can't stand on its own, and that's because it's a number. So let me very quickly on the board behind me, right? If I was to put the number 2 right there on the board, and I left it at that, and I asked you guys, hey, what does that mean? What does that mean? Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, well, yeah, it's the number 2, obviously, but it's 2 what? What is this in response to? Nothing, right? And that's the problem with statistics, because statistics are numbers, and numbers require interpretation. So I got to tell you that this is maybe, I don't know, like two cats or whatever it is that I want. That's why statistics and numbers can be misleading. All numbers require human interpretation because without us, they have no meaning. Similar to sort of images, right? Which we either have or haven't talked about yet, but we'll get to it if we haven't. But numbers require interpretation, therefore statistics, because they rely on numbers, they also require interpretation. And kind of like that Colgate, as we saw, yes, 80% of dentists might have chose Colgate on their surveys, but it's not that they recommended it above all other brands. And so that's why numbers and statistics can often be misleading, is how people interpret those numbers and then how you perceive that interpretation. So just be aware of that. Surveys and polls. So since we're already talking about misleading things, surveys and polls. Again, surveys and polls are great, right? If you wanted to figure out how people felt about an issue, or you wanted to ask people kind of like toothpaste, right? What do they like? Surveys and polls are great ways, right? You have to make sure that the way in which you go about conducting a survey is good. So again, you shouldn't just take you shouldn't just go to a college campus, do surveys, and then say, okay, all Americans like, Colgate toothpaste, right? You're taking a particular demographic, you don't have a very uh, large enough sample that's not just a particular group of people, and trying to apply it to a huge group of people. So definitely you want to make sure that your surveys, right, the people that you have are a mixed variety of different types of people, and you also want to make sure you have enough people to then, be reflective of the population you're talking about. And so that sort of goes into why there are issues with surveys and polls. Either people don't get enough people, they don't get different types of people, and then they try to apply that to other groups of people or large swaths of people. And also the way that they're constructed sometimes can be misleading. So, for instance, if you say which food do you prefer, right, and you had a list of foods, and then maybe you change the wording to which foods do you desire, likely because you use two different terminologies, people will have different responses to those. There's actually a really good experiment where they would show people a car crash and they would ask those people, okay, how fast was the car going? And people would, guess a number, and then they let them go, and a week later they brought them back in and they changed the wording to say, okay, how fast did the car accelerate? And then people gave higher numbers, even though they've already seen that footage. And so that's one of the ways surveys and polls can be misleading, is how you word things. People have different interpretations for that, and it can skew your results. As well as, I don't know about you guys, but have you ever taken a personality test or some sort of survey that asks things about you? Um, I know especially for personality tests, I probably don't answer a personality test accurately or correctly every single time, right? There are some weeks that I feel really bad about myself, and so if a survey asked me how do I feel about myself, I probably would put a lower score than I would maybe a week later when things get better, right? And so that's also another issue with surveys and polls. People are fickle and we're volatile, we're always changing. And so it's really hard to say, hey, a survey and a poll is 100% accurate because people are changed. We have different views on things from day to day. So keep that in mind if you use a survey and a poll. Buzzwords. One other thing to consider is buzzwords. That sort of goes into how I was talking about how language, can manipulate people, right, in logo-based arguments. Buzzwords, you see these all the time. And I have a really good example here. Wendy's natural cut fries. So, what is a natural cut fry? And when I ask this usually in person, students will say everything from, well, they cut it with a knife to, well, they don't let a machine cut it. But is that true? It's not telling us what the word natural cut is. The word natural is a very vague term, right? And even things that are natural aren't always good for you, right? Arsenic is natural and it'll kill you. So these are what buzzwords are. They're words that are very vague, but people use them a lot and they have literally no meaning. They're just meant to, maybe trigger something in you where you apply your own meaning to it and then therefore you'll buy it. One example that I have up here on the screen is the word organic, right? There's no standard, the United States doesn't have a standard on what organic is. And so people will slap the word organic on a product, And because we all have different ideas of what the word organic means, and there's no like standard for what organic is, people will buy it based on their interpretation of that word. And so I have a few here. Words like pure, natural, organic, freedom, logic, better, cleaner, longer, faster, millennial, right? Those are just some examples of buzzwords, words that really have no inherent meaning. People usually apply their own meaning, and that's what Wendy's wants you to do. They want you to apply whatever you think natural cut fries are in order to get you to buy it. Testimonies and narratives. So let's just go through these really quickly. Again, you should know what a testimony or narrative is, right? Somebody's giving their experience of something, and they are very persuasive, right? While testimonies and narratives are logos based, they're also pathos based because, if you're talking about, say, you want somebody to donate to a charity for sexual assault, a lot of times they'll bring people who have been affected by it, and you're more likely to give because they're not only giving their perspective and their experience, but they're also, utilizing maybe emotion to get you to donate, right? And not to demean their experiences or anybody's experience when it comes to testimonies and narratives, but as we sort of talked about with statistics, people are fickle, we're volatile. We never tell the same stories accurately every time, and oftentimes our memory is not the best. I remember there's been a few times where I'd be hanging out with a friend and we'd be telling a story and I would mention something and my other friend would say, no, 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 that didn't happen. But I 100% believe that it did. So I'm not calling people liars when they give testimonies. There are people that are lying when they give testimonies. Not all the time, though. But it's important to note that testimonies, you have to kind of back them with a fact or statistic or harder evidence because testimonies are just people's personal experiences. And because we're not perfect and we don't remember things perfectly, especially as time progresses, our memory of it will get fuzzier and fuzzier. It's great to use testimonies, do that in your paper, but back whatever it is they're saying with harder facts and statistics. And that just makes a stronger argument. Let's also talk about reason and common sense, because again, not all logos-based arguments utilize hard facts and statistics. Sometimes it uses common sense. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier with, hey, if it's raining outside and I have no protective gear, right, common sense will dictate if I go outside, I'll get wet, right? And there are logos-based arguments that they don't need facts, hard facts or statistics. It's just common sense. And this is where we start getting into the philosophy stuff. So we're not going to delve too deep into it, but it is important to cover. So an example of sort of these reason and common sense things are things called syllogisms, which I have here, right? A syllogism is essentially just sort of common sense making arguments. It comes from Aristotle. And one of the most, I would say, one of the most well-known is, all human beings are mortal. Do you agree with that? Yeah, all human beings are mortal. We will all die. Socrates is a human being. Was Socrates a human being? Absolutely. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Obviously, right? That's what a syllogism is, right? As long as the first one is, as long as the first one is a good form of deductive reasoning, the second one is as well, then your conclusion, right, it should lead to a solid conclusion. Now, these don't always work, as I have this example here, right? All ceilings are attached to walls. That is true. All doors are attached to walls. That is also true. Therefore, all doors are ceilings. No, that's not true, right? Now, again, if you're in philosophy, you probably know how to, you do the A, if A is B and B is C, then, blah, 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 right? We're not going to get too much into that, but this is just to sort of kind of touch on it very briefly that, hey, right, you can use common sense to make a logos-based argument, but just be aware, right, that not all things are common sense. And if certain things are common sense, but your conclusion is not common sense, then it's not going to work, right? Just because you provided common sense evidence doesn't mean your conclusion is also common sense. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, and we're back. Sorry about that, guys. Had to go quickly take care of something that could have been taken care of through an email, but I digress, right? It's the state of the world we live in, right? But let's look at some other logical structures that people use when creating logos-based arguments, and some of those are logos-based arguments that use degree, analogies, or precedent. So logos-based argument structures that use degree are arguments that are essentially arguing that, hey, we should do more of this because it's good and we should do less of this because it's bad. Excuse the typo there. But these are essentially arguments that say, hey, right, we should do things such as we should have more trash pickup for our community because more people doing services that help pick up trash is good because we'll have better environments, we'll have more people, maybe doing jobs or what have you. So essentially these types of arguments are saying, hey, we should do more of this good thing because it'll lead to more good, and we should do less of this bad thing because it will lessen the evil in the world. These ones, again, they're ones that utilize that common sense logos-based reasoning usually. While they can be effective, there are times when they're not effective, and in instances, just because something is overwhelmingly good for, say, one demographic of people does not mean it's good for other demographics of people. So that's when those types of arguments don't typically work, but people tend to use them because very often they somewhat work. Analogies. So analogies are when you compare a concept or an idea to something else. So, for instance, right, there are, especially in our current climate of America, there are people that will say, oh, if we register our guns, that's the same thing as registering Jews during Nazi Germany. That would be one that is a bad analogy. They're trying to say that registering guns and registering people are the same thing, which that is falsely incorrect. But people try to use that, and that would be a logos-based fallacious argument, which we'll talk about if we haven't talked about them yet by the time of this lecture. But there are times when analogies can be good, right? So comparing, say, maybe particular rights of people, being a little vague, but you probably get what I'm saying. Particular rights of people have been taken away, and people say, hey, us losing our rights is similar to how it was during insert time period here, right? That might be a good analogy to make to kind of show, right, the similarities between these two things, and then maybe advocate for, what should we do about it. And then precedent. So these ones, they utilize comparison, and they often look towards the conclusions made in the past in order to dictate reasoning of the future. Lawyers, if you're going to be a lawyer, this is kind of what you do. You look at past court decisions and you say, okay, the ruling here was made, and therefore, right, this pertains to my client because they're very similar, and so you should take the same ruling. So this is looking towards the past, seeing what people came to a conclusion, and then saying, okay, let's do the same thing now. That's what sort of setting a precedent is. So again, these are just a couple other ones that you would see, and I bring them up because a lot of students don't realize that these are logos-based arguments, and they are. These are some ways to set those types of structures. So after all of this, you might be saying, well, who should I trust? What should I trust, right? If facts and statistics can't be just taken at face value, what should I do? The first thing is always keep a skeptical mindset. So again, when you're looking through, say, academic articles, they are some of our best sources of information, and they often utilize that sort of skeptical mindset, and they utilize logos in a way that is incredibly effective. And just for a quick rundown on what academic or scholarly articles are, academic articles are articles that are written by professionals in their field, and these individuals usually have master's or doctorate degrees or some form of that. And what they do is they do extensive research for years, usually on teams or sometimes by themselves. They write down their findings. They create complex experiments. They rigorously test them over and over again to make sure they can repeat these results. They write these down. And then what they do with their research is they send it to an academic journal. So an academic journal, if you want to sort of understand what that is, an academic journal is essentially kind of like, think of an academic magazine. You know how if you go pick up a magazine at the store, there are different types of magazines and they all publish different types of things, and within them are particular articles. That's somewhat what academic journals are. There are academic journals for like children's literature, there's academic journals for like film studies, there's so many different types depending on what field you're in. And so what you do as a researcher, after you did, years of study and you've, written this beautiful work, you send it to a particular journal that's interested in that type of information. And what they do is they look at your work, They then will remove your name from it, and they send it to peers, right? Other professionals in the same field. Those people don't know who you are. It's anonymous. They review it. They make sure that your information is correct, your logos are correct, your argumentation is correct, and they'll make some commentary on things maybe to improve, or things to say, hey, did you consider doing this, or did you think about doing that? They send it back to the journal, and the journal hands you those comments. You then make those changes, and you send them back, and it goes through usually that process a couple times until it's ready to go, and then the academic journal will publish your article. So why are these some of our best sort of logos-based information out there? Again, thinking about that process. The first part is that is extensive and rigorous, right? Not only does it take you years to do your research, excuse me, but then you have to be sort of an expert in your field, as well as it then goes through this process of sending it out to your peers, them, making corrections, sending it back to you. So it's like this process you have to go through. Another reason why they're some of our best sources of logos-based information is because they're anonymously peer-reviewed. So what does that mean? It's that whole taking your name off of it and sending it to peers. And that's really important because you don't want the people reviewing your work to know who you are, because they either, maybe they really like you and they don't want to be mean to you and say something that would hurt your feelings, or maybe they really don't like you and they want to just pick it apart and be kind of petty about it, because people are people. So because it's anonymous, at least during that sort of review process, afterwards when they publish it, you'll have your name on it. But that helps to make sure that people aren't being biased against your research. Again, going through various drafts, the more you improve your work, the better it gets. So, you're not having someone just write something quickly and push it out there. And then lastly, something that I didn't mention is that academic journals, the reason why you get, you utilize the library databases in order to find these is because colleges from all around the country and across the world buy subscriptions to these journals. So regular people can't actually look these journals up unless they pay for a subscription. And the reason this is important is because if a business or a company, sponsored a academic journal, let's think of McDonald's, right? What if they sponsored a medical journal? Do you think that researchers who find research that would, say, hey, right, food similar to McDonald's is not good for people, do you think McDonald's would allow them to publish that work? No. Colleges and universities are places of learning where they're unbiased. Again, there are certain universities that do have particular biases, but they tend to not be very credible universities. But the majority of universities are places where people are unbiased. It's all in the name of education and learning. And so because colleges are buying subscriptions to these journals, excuse me, the journals don't have to, worry about whoever's giving them money not liking what they're publishing. Universities don't care. They're just mostly focused on promoting education. So because universities buy these subscriptions, there is really no bias as to what's being published. Now, one of the downsides of that is the general public oftentimes don't know what academic articles are. And so when they do research, right, they'll find, I don't know, Joe Blow on YouTube who, has cherry picked his information and is, they think that is research. That's not research. So that's kind of the downfall of that subscription based. Normal people can't access them, and because they can't access them, they often don't know what's in them or what they actually are. So you'll be having to use academic articles for your final paper, and we'll go more later on how to find them and what they look like and stuff. But just be aware, this is why college asks you and why I ask you to use these, because they are some of the best forms of information we have out there, particularly sort of logos-based arguments and utilizing logos in effective ways. So hopefully you learned something today. I hope that you understand why logos are so important. And I know I focus more on the ways people can be scrupulous with logos, right? A little bit misleading. That's only because, again, as I said, we tend to really like facts, right? Facts and statistics, but we need to be able to realize, hey, right, logos can be used pretty effectively to manipulate people, and we need to be able to discern true facts and logic versus, misleading facts and logic. So if you have any questions, as always, please let me know. I'd be happy to go through these more with you. And yeah, hopefully you do well on your activity today and you can see sort of the benefits of logos and how to properly identify logos. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you later.